Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening for the fourth week of the Rice Institute and Rugby Research and Injury Prevention Group 2026 Summer Lecture Series. My name is Julia Salim Viviani. I am a rising senior at neuroscience major and chemistry minor at Drew University, and I'm from São Paulo, Brazil. I am a 2026 Rice intern, and I'm looking to go into sports medicine. At this point, I will ask my fellow interns to please introduce themselves.
Hi, Dr. Skiba. My name is Danielle Jefferson, and I'm one of the National Study Coordinators for RRIPG and RISE this year. Super excited to be here and hear all about your talk today.
Hi, Dr. Skiba. My name is Chris. I'm another intern here at RRIPG, and I'm a junior at Northwestern, and I'm very excited to hear you speak.
Hi, Dr. Skiba. My name is Jack Kania. I'm from Queens, New York, and I'm attending University of Connecticut in the fall for exercise science, and I'm excited to hear you speak.
Hi, Dr. Skiba. My name is Alon Cooper. I am one of the other national study coordinators for this year. I am a senior kinesiology major from Los Angeles at Hampton University.
Hi, Dr. Skiba. My name is Brendan. I'm one of the interns, and I'm a rising senior at Lexington High School in Massachusetts.
I guess I could go next. Hello, Dr. Skiba. My name is Philip Tessick. I'm a rising junior at the University of Michigan. I previously worked with the RISE Institute last summer as the National Study Coordinator. I believe we met at the American College of Sports Medicine Conference, which is why I was really excited to hear you speak today. But thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Dr. Skiba. I'm Hunter. I'm really excited to hear you talk today. And I'm a rising senior at Lexington High School in Massachusetts.
Hi, Dr. Skiba. My name is Angelica. I'm a rising senior at Stony Brook University in New York. I'm majoring in health science.
Hi, Dr. Skiba. My name is Jordan Hall, and I'm a rising senior at a small high school in New Jersey. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Dr. Skiba. My name is Isabella. I am also an intern, and I am a rising senior that attends Downey High School in California. We're looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Hi, Dr. Skiba. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Erin Zhang, and I'm a rising junior at Horace Mann School in New York City.
Hey, Dr. Skiba. My name is Kevin Serrano. I'm a rising sophomore at Brandeis University. I'm from New York City, and thank you for being here today.
Hi, Dr. Skiba. It's Liliana. It's nice to see you again. Looking forward to your talk today.
All right, did we get everybody? Well, cool. It's really nice to meet all you guys. So tonight I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my work on the Breaking 2 project, some of the science and kinesiology and medicine we use to try and make it all work out. And so hopefully this will be, you guys will enjoy this. All right. So we're going to talk about the Breaking 2 project. Tell you a little bit about myself, which you might already know. I'm still in Philadelphia, although soon I will be joining Vic down at HSS, which I'm very excited about. I wear a lot of different hats. I run a sports medicine fellowship. I teach at the medical school. I see patients. The more interesting part of my life is I do work with elite athletes. In particular, what a couple of my buddies and I call ourselves performance engineers. And we end up working with Olympians and world champions, and we develop software systems that and different mathematical models that allow us to use knowledge of physiology to both predict and engineer desired performances. And so people sometimes ask why we call it that. And it's easy. Engineers use mathematical models to understand things. If you want a car to drive or a plane to fly, you got to use math to do that. And so what we do is we develop these models of physiology, which can predict system behavior, and then we can engineer desired outcomes by changing the inputs and seeing how the models behave. These are two of the athletes I started out with back in, the late aughts when, some of you may not even have been born yet. But on the left, that's Kat Morrison. Kat was a four-time world champion in duathlon. On the right, it's Joanna Zeiger. She was an Olympian at the first ever Olympics that had triathlon. That was the 2000 Games in Sydney. And later went on here to set the world record and win the world championships at the Ironman, or the half Ironman distance. And I would love to tell you that this is because of some secret knowledge I possess that other people don't, but actually I'm just kind of good with Microsoft Excel and equations, and that's really where it all comes from. And if I can do it, so can you. That's my buddy Dave Clark. We publish a lot together, so if you look up any of my papers, you'll find him on a lot of the bylines. So Dave was doing his postdoc at MIT when we first started teaching these techniques, and that's a much younger Skiba there on the left, way back when we used to do this. And we published a paper on this, so if you look up this reference, you can actually download not only the paper, but also an Excel spreadsheet that uses a lot of the techniques I discuss in here if you'd like to play around with them with yourself if you happen to be an athlete. And there's also my book, which is out there on Amazon, that explains all these things for athletes who really don't know a lot about science. So you can feel free to check that out. But models help us understand complex physiology. And the first guy to do this is a guy named A.V. Hill. And back in the early part of the 20th century, he figures out there's this hyperbolic relationship between how fast an athlete can do something and how long they can do it for. And what do I mean by that? What he does is he plots out the world records for different sports. So men swimming, men running, women swimming, women running. And what does he find? But something pretty interesting, that it's a curve. It's not a straight line. And that, you can do something really hard for a really short period of time, but that very quickly that curve falls down and eventually flattens out. So going from, the 100 meter to the 400 meter is a rapid drop, but going from there to 800 is not so big, and going from there out to a mile or two is even less. And so this is an interesting behavior, mathematically speaking, because it suggests that there's some theoretical speed you could run or swim that you could do basically forever. And he figures this out in 1924. But the first guys to make it an equation are Monod and Scherer in the 1950s. And what they realize is this is purely a hyperbola, that your power, or your speed, at any given time, is equal to this area under the curve divided by time, plus this place where the curve levels out, this critical power. And so what this means to you and me is that there's a battery that you have. And if you want to go real hard, you can spend that battery very quickly, or you can spend a long time spending that battery. But in either case, this is all the energy you have. If you calculated the area of each of those boxes, length times width, just like you learned in geometry, they are all exactly the same area. And so what happens is that if you go harder than this thing we call the critical power or the critical speed, you end up in a situation where your time is limited and precisely calculable. And the reason why that's important is that if you're running a marathon and you need to do surges to break your competitors, what that means is that all you've got is this amount of energy to spend, and if you blow through it, you're going to end up walking, and your race is going to be over. So you have to be careful about that. And so what we actually find using this model is that different percentages of your maximum power output, have different physiological consequences for your body. So if you go very easy, and the kinesiology majors already know this, but for those of you who didn't do kinesiology, if you go out and you jog very, very easy at a pace you can easily talk to your friends at, we call that the moderate domain. And if we look at your oxygen use, it stays very flat and level. And if we looked at your blood lactate, it would do the same. If we go just a little bit harder than that, where you start making some lactate in your blood, what you find is that the use of oxygen rises, and then it seems to rise again. It still levels off, but it's got this kind of second hump. If you cross that thing we call the critical power or the critical speed, that speed at which you kind of know on the inside when you're running, if you go any faster, you're going to have to quit pretty soon. We call that area the severe domain. And what does that mean? But that your oxygen use rises, and then it continues to rise until you end up reaching a maximum oxygen use and you throw up in the bushes. And so you can use this information to kind of leverage and understand physiology better. What we know is that if you're running at a pace where you don't generate much lactate, your oxygen use is stable, your lactate is stable, And you're mostly using the type 1 slow twitch, very fatigue resistant muscle fibers in your muscles. But if you start going hard enough that you use a little bit of make a little bit of lactate, you start to use the intermediate fibers in your muscles, the muscles that can be pushed to be endurance or can push to be sprint. And if you go harder than that, you end up in this range where that model begins to hold, that where you have a very limited amount of energy available to you. And the reason why that happens is that you're actually using your fast twitch muscle fibers, which are very strong and very fast, but they fatigue very, very quickly. And so you're trying to hold those fibers in reserve, and that's what pacing is all about, because you want those available to you when you sprint at the end of a race. Does that make good sense so far? If that doesn't make sense, you just say so now, because the rest of this is going to make no sense to you. Okay. So one of the questions we have, of course, is, well, this W prime, this area under the curve, this battery, what is it physiologically? If I went looking in your body, what would it be? And there's two different and opposed hypotheses. The first was that, well, you've got this battery, and it could be glycogen in your muscles, it could be any number of things, and you run it dry like a battery, or you run it dead, and then it has to recharge. Or it could be an accumulation. You generate something inside your muscles, lactate, potassium, whatever, that causes fatigue, and that needs time to dissipate. And the question was, which of these things is true? And the answer is yes. All of these things are happening all at the same time. So when I was doing my PhD, we did some work on the MRI machine, and what you do is you lay in the machine and we make the person do leg extensions until they can't anymore, and we monitor just the quad, and we watch what's going on inside the muscle. And what we see is if we keep things at an easy pace, so 10% below that level where you start using the battery, we see creatine phosphate in the muscle stays very, very stable. But if we go 10% harder, or 20% harder than that, 10% harder than that sort of dividing line we discussed, we see that your creatine phosphate in the muscle drops precipitously, and then you're forced to stop exercise. Same if we look at inorganic phosphate in the muscle, which is a modulator of fatigue. If you go easy, if you stay below the critical power or the critical speed, you see that inorganic phosphate stays very, very stable. But that if you go hard enough, you generate a bunch of phosphate, you're forced to quit exercise. Same thing with pH. Go easy, your pH stays stable. Go hard, your pH dives, you end up acidotic, and you're forced to stop exercise. So things are gathering in the muscle, things are being depleted in the muscle, and that kind of bunch of things results in you getting tired. So, but the point is that we can figure all of that out without the MRI machine. Literally all we need is a stopwatch and a track. And I can tell you all about what's happening in your muscles without ever setting foot in an MRI machine, which is kind of a cool thing. So, which brings us to the idea of breaking two, which is sort of the ultimate question of fatigability. How do we make you run hard enough to run less than 2 hours for a marathon? How do we make sure that we don't upset your physiology so much that you're forced to quit? So Nike was nice enough to share the sizzle reel with me for the documentary, which you can still find online or on the Nat Geo on the Disney app. And let's see if this will play for us. It's not the absolute numbers that matter. It's picking the goal that you think is impossible. You know, it was just like the 4-minute mile. Why should it matter? You know, humans have 10 fingers. They like even multiples. That's probably part of this.
I guess all of these records are arbitrary in a sense. It's just because they become the next step in our sort of sporting heritage and development.
And I think that's where the 2-hour thing comes from. You know, why shouldn't we be able to do this?
58, 59, 60, 61, 62.
If a human body can do sub 2 hours, I think it would be the greatest moment in athletics.
Nice job, Elisa. Okay, we have 1 minute. 1 minute until the start.
When you plot out world records, it should take a couple decades to get to where we want to be. But no one's ever gone flat out from the gun before. That's what I think is so amazing about this project, is we're going to tell these guys, you're going to go for it from the gun, and whatever happens, happens. And that, I feel, is a recipe for greatness.
I'm 100% confident in the science. 100% confident this is mathematically possible and humans can do this. If it was easy, it'd be done.
If there's no hiding from the clock, we're going to send you a long way, about as long and as hard as we think is physiologically possible. And we're going to see if you can do it or not.
Very nice, Elliot. Great job. Go today. Nearly there now.
It's about human endeavour. Why would you try to climb Everest? Why would you try to go to the moon? It's about the journey. It's about learning what our capabilities are.
So when Nike first came to me and said, hey, Skiba, we want to run the marathon under 2 hours. Do you think it's possible? It turns out someone already answered the question. My friend Mike Joyner up at the Mayo Clinic, when he was working on his doctorate, wrote a paper and said, using math, what's the fastest that you can probably run a marathon? And it turns out the answer is you can use this equation. And what you do is you take the person's VO2 max and you multiply it by the percent VO2 max they're at when they start to generate lactate, and you multiply by their running economy. So how many kilometers per hour do they get per bit of oxygen they use? And what you find is something interesting. The ultimate performance is probably an hour and about 57 minutes. What you need to be able to do it is a VO2 max of 80 to 85, a lactate threshold that occurs at 80 to 85% of that VO2 max, and a running economy of about 180 mils per kilogram per kilometer run. It is practically impossible to find someone who's got all of these characteristics at once. And I know that because we screened probably about 50 African runners to try to find the people who had this combination of physiological characteristics. So if you haven't spent much time in the lab, what does that really mean? On the far left here, you've got a guy, we'll just call him Phil S. to protect his anonymity. He is festively plump, and in the best day of his life, he had a VO2 max of about 44 mils per kg per minute. There's Eliud Kipchoge, and at the time we measured him, he was well over 85 mils per kg per minute. So Eliud is roughly 2 of Dr. Phil. But as the animal kingdom goes, humans are kind of crummy athletes. On the far right is my dog, George. He's a mutt, but mostly foxhound. And I've had him on the treadmill at 150 mils per kg per minute. So he's roughly twice Eliud. So really humans shouldn't get too full of themselves when they think about their sporting prowess, because we kind of suck, really. Now I say George is, was a great athlete, and he was, and he had an attitude problem. I don't run with George anymore because he would just look at me and kind of looked like he felt sorry for me, and I don't need that kind of negativity in my life because he was a lot faster than I was. Here's Eliud on the treadmill. Right here, he's running a little bit under 4:30 per mile, so world record marathon pace. And I want you to look at the way he doesn't even look like he's working very hard. Right? He just looks like he's floating. Now on the left there, that's Andy Jones, who you saw in the film. He was my PhD advisor back in the day. On the right there, that's Brett Kirby from Nike. He is got his hand to make sure Eliud doesn't get shot off the back, because this is the first time Eliud Kipchoge's ever been on a treadmill in his life. So it was pretty wild to think that, but yeah. But when Nike calls me and drags me out to Oregon and says, hey, we want you to help train these guys to run the marathon in 2 hours, I said absolutely not. I'm not going to be the guy that takes Eliud Kipchoge, a guy who can run the marathon in 2 hours and 2 minutes, and potentially makes him slower, thinking I can make him faster. But they kind of talked me into it. But as I'm sitting here talking to Eliud, he says, well, I want you to see how I train. So you're going to come to Africa and we're going to train together. And then he kind of looks me up and down and he says, well, you'll ride in the truck and I'll train. And you'll see what Africa's like, and you'll learn a bunch of things. And I said, Elliot, I'm a doctor and I've spent most of my life learning about what's going to kill me in Africa. I ain't going to Africa. And the Nike people said, Skiba, you should check your contract again. You're leaving for Africa in 2 weeks and you better get your shots. So next thing I know, I'm on this little plane on my way to Africa called the Maxi Priest. I don't know what that means, but it was terrifying. But we end up flying over the Rift Valley, which is where the first fossils of humans are found, which is pretty cool. But there's a lot of turbulence, and I'm not a great flyer, especially in a plane that's actually missing some of the parts when you're sitting in it. And but fortunately, this nice lady, this nice Kenyan lady, told me I looked nervous and asked me to pray with her, which made me feel better. So I'm very grateful to that lady. But we land in Eldoret, up in the mountains of Kenya, so about 8,500 feet. This is the airport. It's by far the most modern structure you see in Eldoret. And this is where the guys live, about an hour and a half from the airport. You can see here that they've got these metal roof structures, they're cinder block buildings. This is the drug police. They drove all the way out there to test the women that live in this building. And over here, you can see this blue bucket. That's how they get their water. That's the well right there. So literally the fastest athletes in the world live in very, very Spartan conditions. And I really mean that. When you need your milk, it's delivered by motorcycle in jugs like this. And when you need firewood, it comes on bicycles like this. So you see these guys winning marathons, but when they get back on the plane, this is what they go back to. When you have to go to the supermarket, this is where you go. So it's, as a guy who grew up in New York, this is pretty shocking to me. So the question, of course, becomes like, how do we train these guys? And this is where the engineering part comes in. So we have here is we came to call the Skiba protocol. We quantify the training load, right? And that's important because it's not just about miles or just about how fast you run. There's an interaction between them. And then we need to quantify their ability to perform, because if you're not measuring how they're performing, how are you ever going to know that they're getting better or indeed that they're good enough to do what they need to do? And then you use longitudinal modeling to say, okay, given this much training, they're here. How much training do I have to add to get them to where they need to be? And then once you have them in the event, you use an integrating model of fatigue to measure or to know how much charge you have left in the battery to make sure they run dry right when they get to the finish line and not before. So the training load part is the easy part. You want to know about duration, you want to know about intensity, and you want to know about what's called a weighting factor, because the response to exercise is nonlinear. Interval training gives you way more input per minute than running easy does, for example. So what we do is we take how many minutes they trained, we multiply by the fraction of that critical power, that critical speed where they start getting tired. And this gives us a numerical score that represents the training. So once you have this number, so we take the minutes run, we multiply by where we are on the curve, so they get more points when they're running faster and less points when they're running slower. And you get a score. Now you can compare runs. Yeah, that easy run of 15 miles is worth about the same as a really hard run of 9 miles, and so on. So now you have a good handle on what they're doing. You're not just thinking about mileage anymore. And once you have that number, you can think of it like a dose of medication. And what we do is we put it into a model that works exactly like dose response math does when you're thinking about medications. So what the athlete can do is equal to how fit they are minus how tired they are, or the net result of your medication is equal to the positive effects of medicine minus the negative effects. If I give you 1 aspirin, I fix your headache. If I give you 2, I fix your hangover. But if I give you 30, I'm going to give you a bleeding ulcer and you're going to die. This works exactly the same way. So what we say is that, okay, fitness and fatigue increase as soon as we train, but differently. Fatigue rises faster than fitness. And you know that because after you train, you're tired. You're more fit because you did the exercise, but you can't show it because your legs are tired. And that both of these things decay after you train. The fitness and fatigue start to fade away, but the fatigue goes away sooner. And that's why you eventually look like you're better, because your new level of fitness is uncovered as the fatigue goes away. And these things add over time. So you end up with an equation. Don't let it scare you. Your ability to perform is equal to fitness minus fatigue. Each has its own multiplier to show how quickly it rises. Each has its own decay marker to show how quickly it fades. And so it just looks like this. I trained today for, a certain number of minutes at a heart rate of 120, and I gain 100 points of fitness in blue. But I also gained 200 points of fatigue because we said we end up more tired at first. So if we subtract the two, my ability to perform is negative. But if I rest, you can see that ability to perform rises. And eventually, once the fatigue fades enough, your new level of fitness is uncovered and your new level of performance can be expressed. So for those of you who took calculus, the equation looks like this. Don't let the squiggly thing scare you. It just means sum. The sum, or your ability to perform, is equal to the sum of all of your fitness and all of your fatigue that's coming and going and in relative balance over time. So you can see it over time. These two things start to rise, one workout, two workouts, and eventually, if you train every day, you can see you get to some very good level of fitness that's much more than the fatigue, and your ability to perform is much better than it was at the beginning. But that if we rest you, if we taper you, if we shut you down for your training a few days before a race and let you rest, you can see you get a big bounce in your ability to perform. So the trick is you build out this model and you make that hump happen on the day of the race. So we use performance data. We take the training load, just like that. It looks like that over time. We end up graphing out what the training load looks like. And then we do something interesting. We give the model measured performances. So these are actually for a cyclist. So this is wattage on a bike test. And you can see it goes up and it kind of levels out. And then we just tell the computer, hey, computer, adjust the levels of fitness and fatigue until the green performance curve matches the actual performances we measured. And you get a model that looks like this. And you can see there's a very nice correlation between these two. And now that I have a model that fits our data, I can add more training in the future and watch where that green curve goes so that it ends up at a 2-hour marathon on May the 7th, 2017. So that's cool that we can predict. But what it also allows us to do is another mathematical stunt that allows us to make a fingerprint for each athlete. So day 0 is the day of the race. This curve shows you how much benefit training will get you depending how close to the race you are. And you can see as you get closer to the race, training becomes more important. You get more impact. But then right before the race, you can see it goes negative. And in fact, training too hard a few days before the race will make you worse, not better. So what this allows us to do is understand how the athlete needs to build and then how they need to rest, just as importantly. These curves are very different between athletes. If you remember, I showed you Joanna and Katrina's data. This was Joanna. This was Katrina. If I had them on a team and I tried to train them the same way, one would be great and one would suck. Why? Joanna needs a slow build and a slow taper. Katrina can take a really fast build and a really fast taper. So two athletes, same age, same physiology, but have very different training needs. And when you're working with team athletes, you have to understand this. Each one of these people is a N=1 study. They have their own needs, their own requirements, and if the coach is not meeting them, they're going to get hurt or they're not going to perform well. And that's your job as a scientist, is to understand these relationships and be able to properly advise the staff and say, hey, maybe it's better that we don't beat the heck out of this guy today. He needs some rest, and so on. So this was where we built Joanna's training for the World Championships. And you can see that down here is where she starts, or somewhere out here is where she starts the season. And if you look here at these arrows, each one of these is a race. Each race coincides with a peak that we generated in her performance curve. And first race of the season, she sets a PR. She wins the next race, she wins the next race. Next race, she sets another PR. Note that this point is higher than the others. She's getting better as the season goes on. Wins another race. Here, highest peak of the season, personal best, world record, world championship. at age 38, which doesn't really happen. So that was pretty cool. So the question, though, is that's great that we can get you someplace on the right day, but how do we manage the way it goes? And this is where I talk to you about that model we have using the battery. And we treat it just like a battery, okay? We say how much charge the athlete has in the battery is equal to how much charge they started with minus the sum of everything they've burned, okay? Now, there's other ways you can think about this. For example, college students, you've been to the bar before. We can treat it in terms of alcohol, okay? So, how sober you are, okay, how sober Dr. Lopez is equal to how sober he was at the start of the Super Bowl minus the sum of all the beer he had to drink, which is multiplied by how quickly his liver works. The math is exactly the same. You could do anything. You could do aspirin, you could do beer, whatever you like. But that's how we figure it out. And so if we, let me go here. So this is Katrina during her world championship race. This is her power output on the bike. It's measured at the crank. This is how much charge she has in the battery. And so you can see here that she's doing just fine. And then she hits a big hill and decides to try to put the hurt on her competitors. So she burns through some of the battery and she drops a bunch of the competitors. And then she goes easy for a while and recharges the battery some. And then she hits the hill again and she puts the hurt on them again. And then she recovers a little bit. And you can see here when she really tries to make a race-winning move, she almost empties the tank and ends up ruining the race. But she reels herself in just in time. Recharges for a while, makes another big attack, drops the remainder of her competitors, and coasts it right in, recharging and getting the win. So again, a really nice application of the science, but we can use this when we're trying to talk to the athletes about the way they train. So here on the bike, we have an athlete doing hard intervals, and we're watching the charge in the battery. And so I can see here that this guy can do about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 intervals before he's going to be forced to take some rest. Well, I send him out to do this, and he decides he doesn't want to do that. He thinks this workout looks too easy, so he goes out hard. And so you can see he goes hard, and he empties some of the battery, and he recharges a little bit, and so on until he goes too hard and empties the tank, and he ends up not being able to finish his workout. He only does 5 intervals instead of 8 because he ran the battery dry too soon. So this is a nice teaching tool to be able to go back to your athletes and say, hey, we tried it your way, it didn't work. Let's try it this way next time and see if it goes better. And this works great for the African athletes. So these are the guys who are up at the Ethiopian camp. Over here, that's Elisa DeCisa, 2-time winner of Boston, 1-time winner of, I forget which other ones he's won. He also won New York once. Great athlete, but we had him on the track, and we're keeping track of the numbers for him. And then same thing here. Here's Elliot and his boys in Kenya. And again, I want you to look at this track. Every high school in America has a nicer track. These guys are running on this dirt track with cow poop all over the place. And you'll see here the group of Elliot's boys doing their run. And then just behind them, you'll see the bunch of people from town that came out to the track to see if they could hang with them. And they still do a pretty good job of it. And then here come the townies. So still, pretty impressive. They're running about 4:20 per mile there. So they're doing 3 laps at 4 minutes, 20 seconds per mile, so 3/4 of a mile at that pace. And then they jog for about 30 seconds, and they do another one, and they do that 16 times. It's impressive. We all tried to run with them. We lasted about 100 yards. But it was fun to try. But here's what happens when you take a famous African runner and let them try to run the battery dry. So here's one of the athletes. They go out, they do some intervals on the track. You can see eventually they go hard enough that they start to drain the battery. And eventually they go hard enough that they empty the tank. And you can see here, they're forced to slow down in the middle of the interval. So they take a little rest and they try again, but they can't even get back to where they were before. And now they're forced to just go easy and try and get some recovery. So these things work really well. And so, on the day of the race, real time, when we're doing this, we're watching them on the leaderboard. That's Bernard Lagat, a guy from Kenya who ran for America for several years. At one time, I believe he held the world record at the 1,500 distance, if I'm not mistaken. But he was helping us out in the pacing tent, making sure we got that right. I, of course, after being up for 48 hours straight, was not in great shape. But there's a lot of things that helped us able to do this. All the science we did, but one of the biggest parts of it were the shoes. The shoes saved us about 1:30. And it's not, people think it's about, the carbon fiber plate in the shoes. That actually has nothing to do with it. That just gives a structure. What does it is this special medical grade blown nylon that gives you a little bit of extra spring in your step and gives you some more energy return to the foot. It only lasts for about 50 or 60 miles, and then you have to throw the shoes away. It's only made in one factory in China, which is why the shoes cost $400. But if you're a runner running faster than about 7:30 per mile, they can make a huge, huge difference. So the big picture is that, we can monitor training, we can model performance, we can optimize race execution, and really do very, very cool things that were not thought possible. Eliud Kipchoge set the world record at Berlin in 2018 after this. And he actually in 2018 went on to actually break the 2-hour barrier for the first time. In our effort, he got to 2 hours and 24 seconds. So very close, but no cigar. The next year we repeated it in Austria, and he was able to do it, which was very cool. But what I want you guys to think about is that really big ideas start really small. Nike is a $50 billion company. That's how they had the money to do this. The project cost us close to $40 million between developing the shoes and all the travel and going to Africa and all this stuff. It cost a tremendous amount of money. Nike started in this Winnebago. Literally, the guys drove around in it with a waffle iron making shoes and selling them at local races in the 70s. That's how Nike got its start. But if you're willing to take a new approach, to take the fastest guy in the world and put him on a treadmill and measure his oxygen uptake, you do some really wild stuff. And that's what it takes. So you go out to the middle of nowhere in Africa to guys who literally their main job is farming. Between runs, morning and night, they're out taking care of the animals and mending fences and doing all kinds of farm work. When they strength train, every time you hear an athlete complaining about their facilities, I want you to think about this picture. This is how they do their weight training. It's a metal pipe with 2 paint cans full of cement. Those are the barbells. You get different sized cans to put different amounts of cement in them, and that's how you get your different weight barbells. So it makes you stop to think for a minute. When you go to the track, the start line, there's no tape, right? There's a stick with a bottle on it. That's the start and the finish line. And yet you look at these guys, you know who the Nike people are. We're all the white people, right? But in this group of athletes, there are more than a half dozen world champions and world record holders. There's a half dozen Olympic gold and silver medalists there. Using almost no resources, these people are capable of extraordinary things. This is one of my favorite pictures from the trip. So this was a boarding school next door to Eliud's camp. And these kids, they had never seen a white guy before. So they all came running to the fence to meet us. And, they would say, Mazunga. Mazunga means white guy. Mazunga, come greet us. So we go over to talk to these kids. And we're chatting with them. And I told them I was from Chicago, and they wanted to know if I knew Obama. I said no. But the funniest part about it is that this little girl right here, her name was Philomena. She says, Mazunga, you're a doctor from America. You must teach us something. I said, what do you want to learn? And she said, Spanish. And I said, what? And she said, yeah, we have the books, but our teachers, they really can't make the sounds. We hear a lot of Americans can speak Spanish. Could you help us? I said, okay. So they got their Spanish textbook, and we sat under a tree, and we did some remedial Spanish as much as I could remember from high school. And the next day when I came, they all ran to the fence and said, hola, Phil. So that was pretty cool. That's my legacy in Kenya. Um, I like this picture as well. I call this the fastest and laziest man alive. That's Zersine Tedesse. He was the world record holder at the half marathon at that time. And after 2 weeks in Africa, I was exhausted and passed out at the Spanish Olympic Training Center. And the very first thing he did was to have this picture taken and put it all over Twitter, which did not go over great with the guys at Nike HQ. But this is the picture I had him autograph for me because really it's pretty epic. That's me. That's Andy Jones and Andy Van Haddel. They were my PhD advisors and my dear friends. That's us at the track in Monza, Italy, when we were getting ready to do the project. But my point in showing you that is that this is not a story about Skiba and his magic math that makes everything happen. I was one member of a team, and without any one of us, this doesn't happen. You've got Brad Wilkins here, who's one of the best environmental physiologists on the planet. You've got Brett Kirby, who from Nike, who runs the Nike research sport research lab. You can't really see her; she's kind of hiding under there. That's Lizzie. She did enormous amounts of data crunching for us. That's Andy Jones, my former PhD advisor back there. Without every one of us, this doesn't happen, and without 100 people you can't see in this picture, this doesn't happen. And so my point there is that everything is about teamwork. That's what's important about sports. And the best thing you can do at this point in your education is be the dumbest person in the room. Surround yourself with the smartest people you can find and learn everything you can from them. If I've had one secret in my life, that has been it. Every one of these guys knows something that I don't, and I know something that they don't. And because of that, we were able to do this, which is really pretty cool. So I probably talked a little too long. I'll end it there and say, Asante Sana, thank you very much. And I am happy to answer any questions y'all got.
Thank you for that excellent presentation, Dr. Skiba. Are there any questions, or Dr. Lopez, do you have anything to add?
Anyone have any questions for Dr. Skiba firstly?
Jordan, why don't you start? Jordan, why don't you start?
Okay. Hi. Thank you so much for being here, and that was a wonderful presentation. I was just wondering if there are any points in the study, and the study was fascinating, by the way, where you felt there was a major setback, and how did you overcome any setbacks that faced you?
That's a great question. The biggest setback we had was at the actual event in Italy. We had a pace car. It was a Tesla. And I found out before a lot of other people did that Elon Musk is kind of a jerk, because at the last minute, they decided to not make the edits to the software that we needed to ensure that the car went exactly the right speed. So with 48 hours to go, another guy you didn't see in the movie or see here, a different Dave Clark, not my Dave Clark, who was an engineer, had to hack the Tesla and develop a system of actuators that would work with the gas pedal to keep it at exactly 2-hour marathon pace. So he's got this contraption all built around the bottom of the car, and we had to hire a professional driver, a race driver, to drive but not touch the gas pedal, so that Dave could remote control the gas pedal to keep us exactly on target. So again, had it not been for him, there's no 2-hour marathon. There's none of that stuff. So yeah, you got to be creative. You got to think on your feet.
Thank you.
Chris?
Incredible presentation. It's super fascinating. My question was, you're training the most elite athletes in the world and every detail matters. How much does something like the humidity of the day or the weather or an incline in the track really affect the runners and the time in chasing that 2-hour mark?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, because the reason why we did not, another guy you don't see here, Robbie Ketchel, was our environmental engineer. And the reason why we picked this race or this track at this time, it was a Formula One track, was that it was very flat. Okay, so there was no real hills to worry about. And that weather-wise, it should be about the right temperature. We should have been in the 50s Fahrenheit. And what happened was we ended up with a rainy day that was too warm. And you can calculate exactly how much that makes you slow down. which is exactly how much the guys slowed down, and that's why we didn't hit 2 hours. So that's crucial. And if you look at what happened when we did it again in Austria, we had a much better day, and they ran within 7 seconds of my prediction.
That's fascinating. Thank you.
Kevin?
Hi, Dr. Skiba. Thank you for your presentation. It was really interesting and fascinating to see how data translates toward athletic performance. I just wanted to ask, how transferable do you think this research that you had on these elite runners and some cyclists transferred over to sports that are more like ball-based, like football or soccer, tennis, etc.?
Yeah, it's a great question. So these techniques translate well to any sport where you can measure performance. So how far can you throw a ball? How fast can you run? How much weight can you lift? They work great. Where these models fall apart is in like aesthetic sports, because I don't know what the judge from Ukraine is gonna score this double somersault off the vault, right? So that's the challenge, is that we can do a lot to optimize things like performance and physiology, but where the human element comes in, you're in a much more difficult position.
Thank you.
Aaron?
Thank you so much for your presentation. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how specifically for this project you guys manage the nutrition of all of the athletes involved.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's really one of the first things we talked to these guys about was, what's your diet like? What are you eating? What are you drinking? And this is an area where you might imagine that athletes really know what they're doing, but they really don't. So Zersine is a great example. He had run 58 low for the half marathon and set the world record, but he had never run faster than 2:15 for the marathon. So he was losing close to 20 minutes when he doubles the distance, and that doesn't make any sense at all. That number should be more like 4 or 5 minutes. And so I said to him, Zersine, when you're running, what are you drinking? And he said, I don't understand the question. I said, when you're running, what do you drink? What do you drink? Water? Do you drink Gatorade? And he says, Doctor, when I'm running, I'm not drinking, I'm running. I said, you're telling me you ran the half marathon, you ran the marathon without a drop of water? He says, yeah, I'm from Africa. So we had to totally talk to this guy about, okay, not only do we need to get fluids into you, we need to get carbohydrates into you, because as you have about 20 miles worth of carbohydrates on board, and after that, you run out of gas. And his problem had been he was sort of running out of steam in these longer races because he wasn't managing his fluids and his carbohydrates appropriately. So then we go back and we get him on some Gatorade and things like that. We put him in the environmental chamber. We find out how much he sweats. And then we're able to give him much better advice. At this temperature, we know you lose this much of fluid per hour. So that's how you have to, and that's how much you have to drink. And then we know how much, we can look at you on the treadmill, look at your fuel balance, so how much fat versus carbohydrate you're burning. This is how much carbohydrate you have to make sure you get through your drinks and through your gels. And then we're able to do some pretty cool things. We took him down from a 2:16 marathon down to a 2:06 marathon. So 10 minutes almost purely on the basis of nutrition. So it's a big deal.
Thank you.
Brendan?
Thank you, Dr. Scuba, for such an amazing presentation. I just have a question on if you guys, during the process, considered the elevation and if you guys were going to train at elevation and if that had any factors with their performance.
Yeah, definitely. So these guys, they all live at altitude. So the guys in Kenya live at about 8,500 feet. The guys in Ethiopia train at almost 10,000 feet. And so that has certain ramifications for their performance, but also for their exercise economy. One of the things we find in these populations is that they tend to eat very high nitrate diets. And what that means is that, nitrate, which you get out of leafy green things and root vegetables, a good source of it are beets, for example. And what that does is you eat the beets, or you drink the beet juice, or you eat, arugula or spinach. And that dietary nitrate is converted to nitrite by the anaerobic bacteria in your mouth. And what that does is a couple of things. It opens up your blood vessels to allow better delivery of oxygen. but it also affects the mitochondria themselves and makes them more efficient in terms of how much ATP they need to, or how much oxygen they need to make a certain amount of ATP. So we're training them at altitude where they're oxygen limited. We're feeding them lots of nitrate-rich foods to help accommodate that, and then we bring them down to sea level for the race. And so now they got way more oxygen on board. Their VO2 max goes up, their lactate threshold rises, and they're in a much better physiological condition to be able to try to do what they need to do. So altitude training is a huge part of what you got to do.
Thank you.
Angelica?
Hi, Dr. Skiba. Thank you so much for the interesting presentation. I know we hear a lot about the declining nutrition of American food. So do you personally think that environment or nutrition has an impact on athletic performance? For example, like, have you seen a difference in the performance for like African runners versus American?
Yeah, I mean, for sure we have. And there's a lot of reasons that could be. I mean, the American diet is a huge problem. You see these guys in Africa training. They are not eating power bars very often. They're not like maybe if you're on a run, you use a gel, but otherwise they're not eating manufactured food. They're cooking their own food every day. And most of it's very natural. Their main carbohydrate source, for example, in Kenya, is something called ugali. It looks like mashed potatoes. It's made from a root, like yucca. It tastes like nothing. But that's their main source of carbs, so nothing processed. Same thing if you go to if you go to Ethiopia, those guys, they have a slightly more protein forward diet, but they get a large amount of their carbs comes from actually honey, raw honey, and they make this flatbread. It's kind of like a sourdough. If you ever had Ethiopian food, it's called teff. It's what you have with your food, and so those guys actually we needed to get some more carbs into them. So we try to get them eating more rice and pasta and things like that. But we look at American athletes, it's very, very different. They eat a lot of manufactured junk, a lot of stuff that's not good for them. I see a ton of athletes who sometimes have nutritional deficiencies. Joanna Zeiger, when we were trying to get her ready for the World Championships, I had to beat into her head that power bars are not a food group. She gets a ton of them free from her company because they're a sponsor, but it's it's not good for you. So yeah, I think you're exactly right. You need to feed the machine properly.
Isabella?
Hi, Dr. Skiba. Thank you for a very captivating presentation. I learned a lot. I wanted to ask if your models, when you were examining athletes' performance, if you were able to detect any potential injury risks based off their fatigue.
That's a great question. So these models are actually really helpful in that regard, because what you find is that the way that blue line was rising, that fitness line, what you actually find is that every athlete has a range where they start to perform very, very well. So for Elliot, it's about 2,000 to 2,500 on that curve. If you push more than that, he starts getting hurt. In the nearer term, with the red curve, the fatigue curve, what you find is that people start getting frequent strains and things like that if you let that get more than 2 or 3-fold the fitness line. So what you're trying to do is get that blue line rising 5 to 10% per week to 10 days, and not faster than that, while at the same time not letting that red line get more than double the blue line. And if you're careful about both those things, you can keep them pretty healthy.
Thank you so much.
Hunter?
Hi, Dr. Skiba. Thank you so much for that presentation. I know I've heard a lot about the Breaking Two project, and it was really interesting to hear a lot of the science behind it. My question was about the application for the average athlete. So as an athlete myself, I play hockey. And with a lot of this work that you did with the athletes, it required, like you said, $40 million, all this fancy lab equipment. How could myself and other athletes use these same techniques to better improve our own training? And what do you think is the most efficient way to do that?
Really, all you need is Microsoft Excel. because we're not interested in tracking your physiology. What we want to do is track your ability to perform. And so just like that, easiest thing in the world to do is when you practice, if you're playing hockey, make sure you wear a heart rate monitor. And you can calculate something called a training impulse score if you Google that, just using your average heart rate and the time you were on the ice. And if you track that over time, that's your model input. And then you got to decide what your performance measure is going to be. It could be a sprint on your skates, whatever that is. It could be a series of intervals. You need to design something that's specific for your event or for your sport. And then you feed that into the spreadsheet that I that paper I showed you. You can just download the spreadsheet. You would just feed the data in there, and it'll just work. So really, anybody can do it, and you can figure out a lot of interesting things with that. For example, I've used it with professional hockey players to figure out when you should switch lines, because we look at how quickly athletes burn through the battery, figure out what kind of the average is for the team, and then figure out who you want to pull when. So it really has a lot of applications for a sport like hockey.
Thank you for your input.
Jack?
Hi, Dr. Skiba. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. It was really interesting. I was wondering, obviously, like the athletes that you tested and trained live in like very different conditions from where they compete. And I was wondering, are there any techniques that you use to kind of mimic those conditions, or did you just kind of take that into account when measuring their success and their times and stuff like that?
Particularly when you're dealing with Americans, people live in really different environments all around the country. It's not just one little camp. So frequently what we'll do is we'll send them to altitude for a period of time, because we know the effects of altitude training. They really peak in a week or two, and then they kind of fade away after that. So we might send you up to Colorado to train for a month before a big event, for example, is one way of doing that, to kind of leverage that. Other things are a little bit more subtle. The Africans are very good at stress management. One of the stories I like to tell is that, there was a big 5K race there. And so, cross country race. And so, there's all the Africans there. And then there's all the Europeans, the Americans who also try to train up there. And now they all meet for this race. And something happens with the organization and they're not able to start on time. It's going to start about 2 hours late. And all the white people start freaking out. What do you mean? I had my shake. I had my power bar. I had my caffeine. I can't wait 2 hours to race. I'm ready to race right now. And they're all freaking out and yelling and getting in the faces of the organizers. And all the African guys are just laughing their heads off. Like, guys, it's no big deal. We'll just run in a couple hours. Come take a nap under the tree with us. And so a huge part of it is stress management, right? Western people are fabulously stressed for no particular reason, right? How many deadlines do you have in your life right now? Right? Probably a few. You're a student. Okay. How many people die if you don't meet one of those deadlines? 0 people die, right? Keep that in mind. The more you're able to manage the stress of your life, the more energy you have to put towards your events. So my athletes, I make them put timers on their phones and stuff to keep them off social media. Like they get an hour or 2 a day, and that's it. Because that's stress they don't need. It needs to be going into eating and sleeping and training, period.
Thank you.
Kevin?
Hi, Dr. Skiba. I just wanted to ask, using your model, how does it, fluctuate or vary when you're looking more into race, age, gender, and the specific demographic attributes?
Yeah, that's a great question. What we find is that the models end up so kind of unique to the person, it's difficult to generalize sometimes. So you might say on average, right, if you look at male runners between the ages of 25 and 35, that you train them and their fitness fades over about 45 days and their fatigue phase over 12 to 15 days. But within that average, there's a wide spread. So there's people that shed their fatigue in only 7 days instead of 15. But there's people who it lasts for 50 days. Like some of the swimmers I was working with for the Olympics in London, we ran their numbers. Some of those athletes needed to taper their training for 50 days, almost 2 full months before the Olympics. Now, try telling that to an athlete. Yeah, we don't want you to train very much for the next 2 months. And they look at you like you're insane. But that's the thing, is that, what I find most fascinating about this stuff is that I can measure them in the lab and everything will look totally identical between them. And then I measure the way their fitness and fatigue comes and goes, and it has no bearing on what the physiology is. So we don't understand all the ways this works. We just know that it does, and we don't have the whole picture yet. And that's what's cool about this field.
Thanks for that insight.
Philip?
Hello, Dr. Skiba. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was really great to hear about all the math and the data collection that goes behind putting the models together, and to hear about predicting race times, even predicting a marathon time down to a 7-second interval was really incredible. And it made me think about how there's currently a lot of industries that focus on modeling predictions to set lines or just try to predict the future in any way possible, including maybe the betting industry, Wall Street. I was wondering, these sorts of models that are specific to athletics, how applicable could those be to other domains? And if there are differences, what are those potential differences? Because I know you mentioned that even each model is unique to an individual person.
So first of all, well job on spelling your name the correct way. Phillips who spell with 2 L's are not to be trusted.
Okay? Thank you. I agree.
But yeah, no. So here's the thing. When this class of models was first developed in the 1970s by a guy named Eric Bannister, who 40 years later, after he dies, my Dave Clark, ends up getting his teaching position in Canada, which is a funny thing. But the Bannister model, this class of model, the very first thing he did was go to the track and try to bet on horses. And he won a tremendous amount of money, which led to the federales coming after him and trying to lock him up for race fixing. And so he had to demonstrate to these guys that, number one, it's not race fixing, it's just measuring things. He had heart rate monitors on the horses. And number two, he now learned he was no longer allowed to go to the track without going to jail. So these things are indeed applicable to other domains. But here's the thing. It is a vast oversimplification, right? These models work measuring only training and performance because you are managing everything else appropriately. The minute you don't feed somebody right or you let them get dehydrated, the model falls apart. The minute they don't sleep enough, the model falls apart. The minute they get sick, the model falls apart. So that's the thing. It's very good at giving you the optimal solution. It is very easy to screw something up and not be able to have that optimal solution. So that's the real limiter, is that there's a lot of balls you're juggling when you're taking care of these athletes. And as a practical matter, for you or I to be able to, look at someone that we're not directly working with every single second, like these guys were beaming data to me 2 or 3 times a day from Africa. The minute you don't have that kind of data quality, these models are useless. So it really doesn't get you that far in terms of things like the betting world, for example.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. Oh, do you want to? I also have a question. I just can't raise my hand
Go
because
for it.
unfortunately I'm the host. But thank you so much for that just honestly inspirational presentation, Dr. Skiba, seeing that, or as someone who grew up running a lot of those individuals, many of them were my role models. So it was so interesting to see. And kind of bouncing off of Philip and talking about the models and the different components that really went into this, I did want to pick your brain and ask a bit about, what aspect would you look at or focus on if your next task was to, push the boundaries further, whether that's getting a faster time in, the marathon or in a specific race, or even maybe there's a specific sport that you're looking to, further your research in, whatever it is, and pushing that boundary. I'd say what aspects, of this research would you kind of look at and try to hone in on, focus on, advance? And, is it something that is physiological within the athlete, or is it maybe something that's more external, like wearable technology, something of the sort?
Yeah, it's a great question. So part of it is definitely the wearable. And in fact, I'm working with a company now called Avalo that makes a shoe, an instrumented running shoe that allows you to figure out certain parameters of gait in real time as the athlete's running, ground contact time, flight time, all these kind of things. And so that's going to provide other opportunities to try to optimize. Because it's very difficult to optimize gait. Your brain has had 4 billion years to get good at this, right? But that's one avenue that I'm actively exploring. The other one is looking at this model where you have a battery that drains and recharges. We don't know all the mathematical rules of that yet. And depending on how long an effort is or how hard an effort is, the model behaves slightly differently. And so I'm actually getting ready to publish a new version of that model that basically changes the speed of the recovery, how quickly the recharge happens based on certain parameters. So that's really where I'm heading, where I'm drilling at the moment, is trying to figure out, what are those mathematical rules and how do we express them in a simple way that people can understand? Because as soon as you start throwing calculus symbols on the screen, athletes start freaking out, and we can't have that.
For that project, are you also sorry. Are you also focusing on running or cycling or potentially others as well?
Yeah, when we're experimentally figuring it out, we usually work with cycling because it's very, very easy to measure the work of the athlete because we have sensors in the pedals. So I know with sub-millisecond accuracy exactly how much force you're putting into a pedal. Running, it's much more difficult to monitor. So what we usually do is we prototype with bikes, and then we switch over to running on treadmills and things. And that served us pretty well so far. So we can optimize the math, and then we can take it to a less specific or a place where you just don't have the same data resolution.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, any last questions? No? Okay, Dr. Lopez, do you have anything to add?
No, I just wanted to thank Dr. Skiba. That was just a phenomenal talk. Not only that, but for you guys all to get an inside look on what goes into developing this learning or this knowledge base of science that you apply to athletes. And I think Dr. Skiba showed us or emphasized it's a team effort. Not only that, but more importantly, gaining the correct mentors that can guide you, that advise you on where you should go and how you should get there. They give you a pathway, and by, I guess, feeling confident in, Dr. Jones and his other peers and colleagues, it shows, with a team, you can find a path to try to resolve or maybe even ask more questions that can be heightened amongst the team. And that's really an interesting aspect to seeing research, let alone including my, periodic, my drinking in between. That's great that he was able to incorporate that in the study. Great work, Dr. Skiba. Great work.
Thanks for having me, guys. This is a lot of fun.
All right, then that will conclude the week 4 of the RISE Institute and Rugby Research Injury Prevention Group Summer Lecture Series. We would like to give a big thanks to Dr. Skiba for joining us today and everyone in the audience in attendance. Thank you so much.